Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third episode of What If I Composed For. I'm Simon, and you know what I'm gonna talk about? I'm gonna talk about music, not any type of music. Music in video games. I like games, I like music, smash them together, and boom, you got this show. Today, I will be talking about Castlevania, a gothic horror adventure action game that was created and developed by Konami. Also, I will try to make two tracks in the style of the music in the Castlevania games. This game came out in 1983 in Japan, and it took 2 years to get to America and to the rest of the world. Yes, you are probably way younger than this game. The game came out for the console NES, or Nintendo Entertainment System. The game revolves around this dark and mysterious person known as Dracula. No, not that one. Wrong one again. No, the one that showed everyone that they have like daddy issues. That's the one. If you are already down in the comments being like, it's not Dracula, it's Dracula. Stop. Dracula, also known as Count Dracula, comes from Transylvania, a historical region in the center of Romania. Even though the first official mentioning of Dracula is in the book Dracula by Bram Stoker from 1897, on the Balkan region, there are many stories long before the 18th century of creatures that look like human but feed on the life essence of people. In the first game, you take the role of Simon Belmont, descendant of the Belmont clan, a family of vampire hunters. You go on a mission to Transylvania to unalive Count Dracula. The castle, though, it's filled with monsters from all around the world. Just to name a few: skeletons, zombies, shadows, eyes, demons, bats, wolves, werewolves, golems, ghouls, jinns, a man-eating plant, mummies, Tutankhamun. For some reason, a knight, a great armor, a dark armor, flying armor, elemental jelly monsters, and way much more. Of course, let's not forget the Reaper, Chaos, and Death itself. Dracula throws literally everything at you, but yeah, of course you win. When we ask, was Dracula real? The most simple answer is yes and no. There was no monster that was shape-shifting, flying, was invisible into mirrors, and was drinking the blood of his enemies. Okay, maybe he did, but we don't know actually for sure. But there was Vlad III, Dracula. His father, Vlad II, got his surname Dracul, which means dragon, after joining the Order of Dragons. That was a Christian military order. Dracula translates to Son of Dragon, but he was also known as Vlad the Impaler. He was strong and gruesome warrior and leader. His family was eliminated and tortured by the Ottoman Empire, so when he got into power, he went mad with the punishments against his enemies. The unalived bodies of his enemies were impaled on a vertical stick and left on the borders of his land and castle, just so anyone that thinks that attacking him is a good idea will know that it's probably not. He was often seen how he dances around those impaled enemies, and that's why a lot of people started speculating that he was actually feeding on them. And the common villagers were connecting him to vampires and devils and stuff like that. And the villain that we face in the Castlevania games is exactly like that. Same facial hair, strong, agile, powerful, overall a great leader. And for this setting, the music should have been something special. So Konami put two ladies on the music team to give us that magic. Pardon me if I butchered these names. Kinuyo Yamashita and Sato Terashima were the ladies that set the vibe of the music in this franchise. Because the games were set at the end of the Middle Ages in East Europe, a lot of the music had this gothic vibe to it. When it comes to the technology, the first game is for NES, and the last game was in 2014 for the PC, PS3 and Xbox 360. So of course the music evolved with the time. The sound of NES is familiar to everyone, I think, and you can find some similarities of the music in my last episode. And this is why it has 2 pulse wave generators, 1 triangle generator, 1 noise generator, and something new, the sample channel. The thing with the sample channel is that the samples can be 1 bit. So during my creative endeavors, I didn't use any samples. In the first track, that is. A little fun fact, the instrument that was connected the most to vampires is the organ. The organ is a giant instrument that is actually so big that most of the structures are built around the instrument itself. Because they were so big and expensive, the only places where you could find organs in those times were at the churches. And the number of people that were playing the organ was very low because they are so complicated. The piano has 3 pedals for the feet of its player. The organ has an entire keyboard down there, plus 3, 4 or even 5 rows of keys for the hands, and a lot of more buttons for more control on the giant machine. Some of the pipes are as small as 2.5 centimeters. That's not a small pipe, maybe the pipe has a great personality. Going up to 10 meters. For those who have no idea how big 10 meters is, you need 4 stories high buildings for that. That's big. Okay, now let's jump to the workstation where I can show you how I made 2 tracks in the style of Castlevania. This is just juice, so chill out. For the first track, I wanted to go with more retro vibe, the already known 8-bit vibe. So here you go. That's the track and this is how I made it. I went with the basics of 2 pulse waves that were giving us square waves. They got panned on opposite sides, the low square wave oscillator on the right and the high square wave oscillator on the left. 1 triangle wave as for the baseline and 1 noise oscillator. When it comes to the noise, I used a regular white noise, but I put an analog 24 decibel filter with key tracking. The key tracking allowed me to change the filtered frequencies and get different percussive sounds. I managed to get hi-hat, snare and kick drum all from 1 oscillator just by playing notes from different octaves. The higher the note, the higher the frequencies. All of the oscillators also had 1 LFO that was affecting the frequency so the sound would have more movement. In the first part of this track, I didn't use any drums. I wanted to go with the gothic metal vibe that the old games had, so I went with E minor. The track starts with this riff of 16th notes, keeping the root E6 and declining from E7 down the E minor scale. The same progression is played by the high square wave oscillator and the low square wave oscillator, but the low one is playing 1 octave lower. In the background, the triangle wave oscillator plays the bass melody. its progression is 1-6-7. In the second part, the bass continues with the same melody. The only difference is that on the last bar, instead of playing the note D4 as before, it goes down the E minor pentatonic scale from E4 down to A3. Here we finally have the percussive noise. As I said, it has 3 different octaves for 3 different percussive elements. A0 for the kick, F5 for the snare, and B8 for the hi-hat. Because it's still one oscillator, it can play only one note at a time, so the drum pattern needs to be linear. Linear drumming is when there are no 2 limbs playing at the same time, one element at a time. So I went and built this bit and let it play through the second part. In this part, the 2 square wave oscillators are playing with each other. Here we have the high square wave oscillator and here is the low square wave oscillator. This part goes for 8 bars. Since they are playing at the same time, they are building intervals with different vibes. The first bar has 2 parts. First, there is a perfect fifth situation, and halfway it goes into a unison. The second bar goes to perfect fifth again and stays there for the duration of it. This sequence of 2 bars is repeated for the next bars with small differences in the melody of the high square wave oscillator. On the 7th bar, the high square wave oscillator changes its progression and goes from B5 to E6 to G6 to A6. On the second half of the 8th bar, the low square wave oscillator goes up chromatically from G5 to B6. In this part, the bass goes down the E minor pentatonic scale from E4 to A3. To give energy to the build-up, the noise oscillator drops the kick and hi-hat sounds and plays with the snare with the 16th notes. In the next part, the third one, aka the main part, the drumming pattern gets some changes. The notes for the snare and hi-hat become longer and that gives the impression of a snare with reverb and an open hi-hat. The rhythm goes for the entire part with a build-up at the end. The bass changes the progression from its 1-6-7 melody to 3-7-1. Those notes are actually the notes of the E minor 7 chord with the third note missing. It keeps this melody only adding a scale down on the 4th and on the 8th bar. In this part, the low square wave oscillator has the role of a support for the melody of the high square wave oscillator. In the first bar, we have octaves on E and G. On the second bar, we have the minor second, but it's an octave higher, for 2 bits, and minor third 2 octaves up. The third bar has the same octaves as the first, but the 4th bar gets the perfect 4th for 2 bits. After that, the high square wave oscillator goes down the E minor pentatonic scale. After that, the previous 4 bits repeat one more time. And after that comes part 4. That's it. Part 4 is identical to part 1, with the only difference being there is the percussive notes holding the rhythm of the second part. After that, the track goes back to part 2, then to part 3, and then back at the beginning of the track so it can be used as a loop. Off to track 2! For the second track, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to show the world of vampires and love and death and conquest, power, so I used instrumental orchestra. My goal was to go for more cinematic vibe or a trailer for a game or something. The last game was 8 years ago. We do have an awesome show, but come on, we need a new game. So here we go, a track for a new game. As you could hear, I went with more orchestral vibe, as I said. I didn't use a lot of instruments, but I made use of the string section and the organ. I already talked about the organ, foreshadowing. For me, the organ was the most important instrument of this track. The big, powerful sound is why I wanted the organ to be my main instrument. I also used some samples. Throughout the entire song there is a rain with thunder. I chopped it and edited it so it will be fused to the track. Because the strings in the track are following the same notes as the organ, I will talk about the notes used for the organ, but they will reflect on the strings as well. Also, I will separate the sounds into 3 groups. The term low part stands for the low notes of the organ and the notes for the bass and violoncello. Middle part stands for the middle notes of the organ and the notes for the viola. High part stands for the high notes of the organ and the 2 sections of violins. Before I start talking about the notes, I want to talk about the panning of the string section. In an orchestral setting, there are rules of who sits where. Every orchestra is set in a particular order. If you stand in the middle, where the conductor would stand, for example, going from left to right, you have the first violin section, sometimes called main violin section. After that is the second violin section, then the viola section. On the right of you would be the violoncello section, and right behind them is the bass section. Of course, there are other sections, but I didn't use them here, so I will not talk about them today. The piano is usually set on the far left side of the stage, right behind the violin section. But since I used an organ and I wanted to be as grandiose as it could be, I set it in the middle, little bit to the right, with compression and reverb blasting it all around. The track starts with the low part playing the progression 1, 5, 3, 4 in the A minor scale. After 4 bars, the middle part joins in with the progression 1, 2, 3, 4, building the octaves and adding a perfect fifth on the second part of this part. In part 3, the high notes show up. They are playing with the chords A minor, E minor in its first inversion, C major in second inversion, and in the fourth bar they just play E7 and its major second D7. The middle part has changes as well. There we have a long E6 note playing. The relations there are evolving into something new. We have an extra perfect fifth, then that changes to perfect fourth, then to the major third, and then to the major second. This section gets repeated, so the third part lasts for 8 beats. In part 4, the high part has the biggest change. Together with the middle part, they start arpeggiating A minor chords for 8 bars. The middle part still holds the E6 note from part 3. In the last 4 bars of this part, the low end stops with the progression, but the violoncellos are holding the D5. The long E6 that's played by the violas is the perfect ninth to the D5. In the last 2 bars there is also a sample of sinister laughter. I got that laughter by recording myself trying to be Dracula. I don't know. That sample went through some EQ and reverb. The laughter also brings in the second half of the track. The fifth part is filled with several thunder strikes in the rain sample. Here, the high and middle part are arpeggiating a minor chord of the note that's played by the low part. The note goes up chromatically, from A up to G sharp, 12 semitones higher. This part goes for 7 bars. After that, the next part, part 6, is, funny enough, 6 bars. Here, the low part stays on the A note, the middle part plays accompanied by the second violin section, playing the chords A minor in its first inversion for 3 bars. Then it goes with D diminished for 1 bar and it resolves with D minor for 2 bars. In the meantime, the first violin stays with the high notes of the organ playing a melody in the A harmonic minor scale. After that comes part 7. Part 7 is the same as part 3, with the only difference being the rhythm of the violins. The second violins are still playing the progression, but the first violins are holding a long E7. Everything ends with A minor chord on the organ and the note C6 on the first violins. The C note is the second note in the A minor chord. That chord lasts for 4 bars. In the fourth bar, there is a thunder that slowly ends the sound of the music but keeps the rain in the background. The fifth bar of this part has one more symbol. Belmont! That's Dracula screaming for Belmont, his arch nemesis. Same as the laughter, that was me with some EQ and reverb. And that's how the second track ends. And that's what I would do if I composed for the Castlevania games. If you found this video funny or helpful, let me know down in the comments. And while you're down there, bite the neck of that subscribe button and share it with some friends or something, I don't know. I'll see you next time on What If I Composed For. You know how vampires can't go outside because the sun gonna burn them, and if they are exposed long enough to the sun they gonna like disintegrate. So the only way for them to get vitamin D is to use someone as a juice box from time to time. They need it to survive. Do you ever think about that? No, of course you don't. You only think about your avocado toast.